Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fourth chapter in the book of Acts. We're going to try and make it all the way up until the 23rd verse. Herein we read of Peter and John's investigation by the Sanhedrin after having performed a healing of miracle in the temple to a beggar who was known by all. He had been there since birth, or from very early age, and he asked for alms as per custom. But what Peter says is, "Gold and silver I have none, but what I have to you I offer to you. I offer you the power to walk in the name of Yahshua Messiah." So the name is the controlling element of the miracle. The man is instantly made well. He leaps up and is praising Elohim in the temple. So he attracts attention and causes a commotion. And so Peter kind of gets an audience and gives a sermon which lasts till the end of the thing. And he says, and seeing it, verse 12, Peter responded to the people, "Men of Israel, why do you marvel at this? Or why are you looking so intently at us, as though by our own power or fear or reverence we made him walk?" So he's saying, take your eyes off me. I am nothing special. The power that I have is in the name, and that is the power in the presence of the one who I worship. He is the author of this miracle. I am just the instrument. I am the mediator. I did not do this in myself. We are nothing special. The Elohim of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, the Elohim of our fathers, esteemed his servant Yahshua, whom you delivered up to and denied in the presence of Pilate when he had decided to release him. So he's addressing a Jewish audience, and this wouldn't have been too long ago. This is this is post-Pentecost, so this is a little over 50 days ago, or 2 months ago by our calendar. And he reminds them that they had denied him and exchanged him for Barabbas, a notorious agitator, when Pilate tried to offer them a way out by releasing, as per Roman custom, one prisoner who was bound for the death penalty or something on the Passover. And but verse 16, and the faith in his name, this one whom you see, know, his name made strong, and the faith which comes through him has given this perfect healing before all of you. So faith is the access point through which the miracles can manifest, because what does he say in Mark 6:4? He was in his hometown, but he couldn't do the miracles because of the lack of faith. So where there is faith, all is possible. We can move mountains. We can be brought healing, wholeness, wellness, and life and restoration. He also admonishes them to repent, and he says in verse 22, for Moses truly said to the fathers, Yahweh your Elohim shall rise you up a prophet like me according to your brothers. Him you shall hear according to all what he says to you. So he's quoting the Deuteronomy 18:15 as we mark our book of Deuteronomy. They didn't have verses, but in that passage, Moses points to an even greater figure than him to come, and everyone who does not hear it shall be utterly destroyed, not in this life, but certainly in the next. So there are definite consequences for rejecting, and there are certain blessings for accepting him. And, he's just the continuity of the prophets from Samuel, and you are the sons of the prophet, and of the covenant which Yahweh made with our fathers, saying to Abraham, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So he's reminding them of their heritage after indicting them for indicting that they had rejected him, but now they see this power working through him, and they can hopefully be one. But this after this speech, which ends in the verse after the one I just read, we find them in a new location. They are answering in the temple to the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees would have been the most prominent faction in the temple level. Most of the antagonists in the Gospels are Pharisees, because they reign supreme at the synagogue level. But the two otherwise mutually antagonistic factions had a common cause and a common enemy to unite over, first in this man and then in his followers who are bringing faith, which is they thought they killed the man, but they couldn't kill the movement. And as they were speaking to the people, the priest and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them. Priest would have been at the temple. They would have performed the animal atonement sacrifices, and there was also perfunctory details which were performed by Levites, and the captain of the temple, that would have been the captain of the temple guard, he would have been next in rank to the high priest. And the Sadducees, it was usually from their ranks that the high priest sprang. The Sadducees, the Pharisees were patriotic, conservative. The Sadducees were liberal, appeasement-minded. They collaborated with their foreign oppressors. The Pharisees wanted to stay separate from them, their influence, but the Sadducees were the wealthy aristocrats who ultimately had the more substantial leverage with the powers that were. Being annoyed because they taught the people and announced the resurrection from the dead in Yahshua. So the resurrection was, they were aware of the rumor of a resurrection, and they took great lengths to suppress it. They insisted that Pontius Pilate send a Roman legion to guard the tomb, just so that no one would break in. They were worried that his apostles, his disciples, would break into the tomb, steal the body, and hoist it up. But what happens is an angel comes down, and then they suppress the secret from getting out. So they're all about suppressing the thought of the resurrection, because if people think it, then they can believe it. And so they don't want it said at all, and that is their pragmatic prohibition of permittable topics to be preached on. The resurrection threatens everything they have, everything they are. And they arrested them and put them in jail until the next day, for it was already evening. So the evening sacrifices ceased at 4:00 p.m. as we mark our daily calendars. So it would have been illegal for a Jewish tribunal to be conducted at night. So hence the Savior's indictment by the Jews was judicial malpractice, and they did not observe the principles of equitable jurisprudence as outlined in the laws of Moses, certainly, and they had a fabricated charge. But that was an extreme emergency. That was an extreme danger as they saw it. They couldn't wait to get rid of this man. These men could wait. But many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of the men became about 5,000. So not too long ago at Pentecost, we witnessed that the numbers of their rank were 3,000. These were Jewish men from all different geographical locations who had gathered in Jerusalem for the temple for the festival of Pentecost, when they are visited upon by the Ruach Kodesh, which enables them to communicate the languages of others without any foreknowledge. So they're convinced, they're converted. The numbers keep growing, and the evangelical progress is documented by Luke. Several times we read that it just kept flourishing, kept growing, kept prospering, and this is one of those verses. So we have a definite number. Now, Christianity has about at least 1.2 billion people today, but 5,000 was kind of a big deal for, where it really started. And it came to be on the next day that their rulers and elders and scribes, as well as Ananias the high priest, and Caiaphas, and John, and Alexander, and as many were descendants of the high priest, assembled at Jerusalem. So this is the next day when they can legally conduct the trial in the light of day. And rulers, elders, and scribes were three positions that the Sadducees and the temple division of labor would have been, and this was reflected at the synagogue level. We find them outside of the temple. Yahshua always confronts both rulers, elders, and scribes. Scribes and Pharisees are common. Ananias was the high priest officially from the year 6 to 15 A.D., but after that he was deposed because of political machinations. But the Jews would have considered a high priest for life, and because of the corruption, I think ultimately 5 of his children ended up serving as high priest, one of whom is Jonathan, who may be the John of this verse. And we don't have too much information on Alexander, but the high priest, many of these men who are his descendants, would eventually fill the high priest role. It was Caiaphas now who was his relation by marriage. He was his son-in-law, but 5 of his biological sons would fill the vacancy before the temple was destroyed irrevocably. And having placed them in the middle, they asked, "By what power and in what name did you do this?" So expecting him to say by Yahshua. So they're acknowledging that the miracle, they're being brought for the miracle and not the message, but the crowd they kind of gather attracts their attention, and so they summon them, and they want to know, what name did you do this? If it was in the name of Yahshua, they could expect trouble. They'd be in big trouble. But then Peter, filled with the Ruach Kadesh, said to them, "Rulers of the people and elders of Israel." So he doesn't answer their question right away. He is filled with the Spirit, and one of the time reminded in the gospel that the Master commanded, in fact, his disciples to take no premeditation of what you will say or how you will answer when you are arrested and brought before the synagogues and the rulers. And so we have the assurance of the promise of the Ruach Kadesh, who had not yet come yet, but was already here, not yet come when that promise was made, and we witness the fulfillment of that promise here. And what is the Spirit? He addresses them with the due deference of their right title. "If today we are called to account for a good deed toward a sick man, by whom he has been healed." So what's the controversy? We just healed a sick man. What possible controversy could you have for this being done in the temple? This is a good deed. This is it's inarguable that this is a work that should not be objected or opposed, but they're so jealous about the name, and that they're fearful of the power that they need to know. They want to know, and so. Once more, it's not the fact that the man had been healed, but the fact that he had been healed by the name, which was such the cause for them being upset and consternation. "Let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that in the name of Yahshua Messiah of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom Yahweh raised from the dead, by him this one stands before you healthy." So he gives them the answer they're expecting, the answer they do want to hear, but also the answer they don't want to hear. They are afraid of that name because this man just won't go away. There's something about him that sticks on and grows and latches. He had a movement that eventually became bigger than their own religion. But, with the crowd, he says, you rejected him, you denied him, you betrayed him. But he says, personally, you crucified him. He is in the den of enemy territory. These are the men who had arranged the execution of his beloved master. And he does not mince words with them. He is as bold as a lion in his courage. But once more, he also tells them what they don't want to hear. The resurrection was real. He had witnessed it even before the visitation of the Ruach Kadesh, and some 500 men at least witnessed it. And he still lives, even though he's ascended back into heaven. His power is manifest on the earth through their hands, and that is how this man stands before you healthy. He had priorly been paralyzed from the knee down or the waist down or something, so he was a lame, cripple, paralytic. "This is the stone which was rejected by you builders, which has become the chief cornerstone." So the concept of a chief cornerstone is the physical foundation for the metaphor of the building of the church. So Yahshua likens himself to this in Matthew 21. He cites the Psalm 118 from whence this verse came. The one who will be rejected will be the foundation upon which the new kingdom is built. So the tragedy of it all was he was rejected by his own people, and the ones who should have been authorized and the experts in Scripture, and the scribes and the Pharisees, they did not recognize this man, though they had studied the law and the prophets. Well, no, the Sadducees didn't really affirm. They didn't study the prophets. They only accepted as canonical the laws of Moses. "And there is no salvation in anyone else, for there is no other name under the heavens given among men by which we need to be saved." So there is no other way, there is no other person, there is no other road, there is no other ticket except one, and that is offensive. Its very exclusive connotations offends the world, because our world values diversity, tolerance, all these, you tell them that they look on narrowness as something that is viceful, but there is only one way. Now, Yahshua was certainly open-minded in a lot of things, but in this way there is no compromise. There's only one way. That way is through his name, and this information is relayed through his chief, most trusted apostle, Peter, and the necessity of our salvation is indicated by the word need. So it's not might be saved, it's need be saved. That certainly makes sense grammatically. There's only one name by which a man might be saved, but the need, so we have an absolute necessity to be saved, and God does not need us. He is self-created, self-existent, self-sufficient, and self-sustaining. Therefore, we can't add anything to him, but he does want us. So he did not create us to live or to be saved out of necessity. He does not save us out of necessity, but out of genuine want and decision. And seeing the boldness of Peter and John, and perceiving that they were unlearned and ordinary men, they marveled, and they recognized that they had been with Yahshua. So they take note. The courage and the boldness is obvious. They are confronting the men with the power of life and death over them. They do eventually try. They do, in the 5th chapter, they do rule and signal to their execution. But the intervention, the wise, prudent intervention of Paul's mentor, Gamaliel, who was a lot more moderate in his approach to the nascent Christian sect than his more extreme and zealous student protege. But they know that they were not formally educated. They were unlearned and ordinary, and they were amazed by the power of their response. So they weren't expecting them from someone like them, and they immediately put together that he had been with Yahshua. So there is a power to Yahshua, and it is made manifest in the Ruach Kadesh, who is his designated successor. And seeing the man who had been healed standing with them, they could not contradict it. So everyone knew this man. He had been blind. He had been there since he was a youth, begging on the mat out in front of the temple, a charity case, a lame paralytic. There was no SSDI. There was no American with Disability Acts in ancient Israel. If you were blind, crippled, or in any way handicapped, begging was your only means of livelihood. So he would have been a recognized presence. I guess he had some prime real estate as far as beggars are concerned. But, they recognize that this man is now standing, and they cannot contradict. They can dispute objectively, they can dispute whether the path to salvation is as rigid as they say, but they cannot contradict. What they cannot contradict is that the miracle happened, and they're telling him that it was in the name of this man who they had crucified and was resurrected and was still alive, and he was living through them, and he was going to eventually overthrow them. But when they had commanded them to go aside and out of the council, they consulted with one another. So the them wouldn't have been just the blind man, but that word is plural, so it would have been Peter and John as well as perhaps him. So they dismissed them for their private exchange of strategy. They're consulting with what to do with them, with one another, saying, "What shall we do to these men? For indeed that's an outstanding miracle that has been done through them, is apparent to all those dwelling in Jerusalem, and we are unable to deny it." So they're in a rut. They cannot, they have absolute, infallible, and incontrovertible evidence that these men have the power of miracles, and they say it's not them, but it's through Yahshua. So no one can deny this. We can't deny it. This man was recognized. He was a famous presence there. He would have been a mainstay, and now he's walking, and he's shouting and praising Elohim. So he's attracting a lot of attention, and these men are speaking with boldness to the crowd. They're speaking with boldness to us. What are we going to do? Not an easy answer to question. They'll try and weasel their way out of it with, as much leverage as they can, because they remain the Sanhedrin. But in order that it spreads no further among the people, let us strongly threaten them to speak no more to anyone in this name. So they're aware that it's spreading like wildfire. There's a contagion to this new faith. They have something to offer that they cannot, and they want to suppress it and contain it. So 5,000 is the cap. It's the maximum number. They don't want it to go any further. So the way to do that is to suppress the mention of that name. We forbid the performance of the miracles in his name, and they cannot preach or teach of his name or his resurrection or anything else about him. He is a forbidden topic. And they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor to teach in the name of Yahweh. So they had decided on the verdict, and then they tell them what their decision was. So much as they can't speak or teach it anymore. But Peter and John, answering them, said, whether it is right in the sight of Elohim to listen to you more than to Elohim, you judge. So he's defiant, and he's openly so. He is saying, you guys are the Sanhedrin. You're supposed to be the guardians of Elohim's will, yet we are more closely connected with him. We know that this is what he wants us to do, so we appeal to a higher authority. We do not recognize your authority, which is as nothing towards the one they jealously guarded. And Peter specifically, I think, says whether it is possible to obey man or Elohim in 5:29, which is a somewhat similar scene contextually as this. For it is impossible for us not to speak what we saw and heard. So there's an irresistible urge about this message. Once you live it and experience and taste it and see it, you cannot help but spread it and share it. And they are compelled by a divinely irresistible force. So they don't have a choice. You can tell them one thing, but they already made their case that they're going to keep appealing to Elohim. They are performing his will, and they're not going to let their intervention obstruct with the performance of the will and its fulfillment. And having threatened them further, they released them, finding no way of punishing them because of all the people, because they were all praising Elohim for what he had been done. So this is often the quarrel and pickle and dilemma of the ones who are aligned against the followers of the way and the way himself when he was in the flesh. The crowd loved him. The crowd loved the ones who had healed in his name. The crowd is in their corner, in their control, and they don't want to sacrifice popularity, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a popularity contest. They are determined to preserve and maintain their power and the status quo that it is attached to, but they cannot do that if these men are stealing the affection and the hearts of their disciples and their followers. So they don't even physically, they can threaten them, but, all they do, they just renew, don't teach anymore. But, they can't even physically strike them, because then they'll lose what little support of the crowd remains for them. They are in their corner for all intents and purpose. For the man was over 40 years old, on whom this miracle of healing had been done. So imagine that being spending the first 40 years of your life unable to walk, begging, reduced to alms and charity outside the temple, and then just having a whole new lease on life, able to walk. It's a miracle. It's a transformation, the likes of which are naturally impossible but supernaturally manifest. So for the first half of his life, he couldn't walk, and if he makes it, we don't know how long he lived, but you're never too old to appreciate the new lease on life. And having been released, they went on their own and reported all that the chief priest and elders said to them. So these two men, John and Peter, are the representative of the apostles, but far from the fullness of their ranks. There are 12 of them at this point. Matthias is named the Judas's successor in the first chapter, but we don't read anything about him after that. Paul, for all intents and purposes, becomes Judas's replacement. But according to legend, Matthias did die a martyr's death, so he did. His deeds aren't mentioned or deemed worthy of mention by Luke in the book of Acts, but he was a evangelical credit to him. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.